Hello, my name is Robert Dean Steele, and this is Real Living, your daily Bible study. Today I'm looking at James chapter 1, verses 12 to 15. Listen to what James says. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God does not tempt by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own desire and enticed. And after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it's full-blown, gives birth to death. What James is writing here to us today, he says, blessed, first of all, are those who persevere under trial. Maybe right now you feel like you're in that trial period. You feel like everything around you is falling apart. You feel like everything is spinning out of control. Maybe that's how you feel right now. James says, actually, you are blessed. You say, I'm blessed? How can I possibly be blessed in a situation like this? You need to understand that there's something happening behind the scenes, something that you do not see or do not know. But God knows. And God knows exactly what he is doing. Sometimes you feel he doesn't know what he's doing. You say, God, do you really know what's going on? God, do you really know what you're doing? Well, I want to assure you that one of the wonderful attributes of God is omniscience, which basically means he knows what he's doing. He knows all things before it even happens. James says this, having stood the test, that's part of the reason. You are being tested. And now I want to tell you something. To have a testimony, you have to be one who has gone through a test. To be an overcomer, you have to overcome something. If you're going to have victory, that means that in that moment, you're going to feel like you're a victim. If you're going to be a conqueror, that means you have to have something to conquer. So it's very important that you understand this. He says this, having stood the test, he says, on that day, you're going to receive a crown of life. The crown of life is given to those who stand the test. Those who come through life trusting the Lord with every fiber of their being, following the Lord with all their heart and soul and mind and strength, and loving their neighbor as their self. James says, in that day, when Christ appears, you will receive the crown of life because you stood the test, because you started off well and you ended well. Again, I remind you, it is not how you finish, or start, I should say, that's important. It's how you finish. You don't get the prize, you don't get the medal, you don't get the wreath at the beginning of the race. You get the wreath, the prize, the medal at the end of the race. That's when it happens. Then James comes to a very important point, because often what happens to us is when we're in the middle of the trial, we blame God. We say, God, you're tempting me right now. Well, James says, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God does not tempt by evil. God is good. Now, the tempter, we do know, is Satan, and he loves to tempt. In fact, his whole agenda when it comes to you is to rob, kill, and destroy whatever you have and whatever you shall become. You are an enemy of God, especially, or an enemy of Satan, when you are a follower of God. That's very, very important to know. It says, God does not tempt with evil, nor does he tempt anyone. You see, God's not in the tempting business. God is in the loving business. He's in the business of perfecting, encouraging, strengthening us. So when we are tempted, he says this. This is what James says. He says, but each person is tempted when they're dragged along by their own desire and enticed. You see, Satan knows exactly where you're weak. He knows exactly where to attack. Let's say, for example, that you have an anger issue. Well, Satan's going to do everything he can to make you angry. Let's say you have a fear issue. Well, he's going to use every type of device that he has to cause you to be afraid. That's why you and I need to trust God. You see, we're enticed by our own evil desires. In fact, about 90% of the trouble that we get into is self-made. That means that When someone does something to you, something happens to you, you have a decision to make. And that decision is, am I going to allow this to make me better or bitter? What am I going to learn from this experience? How can I grow from this experience? Those are the questions that you should be asking. Not, God, get me out of this thing. Because sometimes God allows things to happen to us because he knows at the end of the day we'll be stronger. We'll be more refined. We'll have a better concept. We'll be more compassionate. We'll be a learner. All of those things are very part of that. So sometimes when you say to yourself, God, get me out of this, maybe you should just say, God, help me grow through this thing. Remember, 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, God will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able to endure, but with the temptation, a means of escape. So understand this. It's all a growing experience. One man put it this way. He says, enjoy the journey. The beginning is the beginning, and the end is the end. But in between, that's where real life happens. Well, then he says, after desire has conceived and give birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. He says, understand this. It all starts with temptation. Temptation in itself. Well, you know what? There's nothing wrong with it. You say, there's nothing wrong with it. Of course not. You haven't done anything. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you have a desire towards chocolate cake. But you know that chocolate cake, in your case, is not a good thing. So there you have a piece of chocolate cake. You're looking at the chocolate cake. You haven't put your hand upon it. You haven't put it in your mouth. You're just looking at it. You haven't done anything wrong. It's when you take the chocolate cake, you put the fork into it, put it into your mouth. That's when it becomes sin. James says, those that know what to do is right and don't do it, that is sin. If you have a problem, for example, with cursing or a problem with drinking or something else, and someone comes along and causes you to, they swear in front of your face and the first thing you want to do is swear, or they put a drink in front of you and the first thing you want to do is drink. Well, if you don't swear or you don't drink, you haven't done anything wrong. What James is saying is when you do it, it says it gives birth to sin. And when it's full grown, it gives birth to death. There's a separation that happens. There's a downside to sin, folks. It really is. Sin always looks good at the beginning. But when it takes you someplace where you never thought you'd go, make you do things that you never thought you'd do, or become a person that you never thought you'd become, sin can bring to death. Sin can destroy you and will destroy you. It will separate you from God. It will separate you from others. It will separate you from yourself. You see, we need to understand something. This is a journey of life. James says, listen, when you persevere under trial, you will receive a reward. And that reward is the crown of life. Don't say that you're being tempted by God, because God doesn't tempt you. But we are dragged away by our own lusts and our own desires. The enemy may tempt us. But when we succumb, when we give in to sin, what happens is it can lead to eternal death. It can lead to separation from ourselves, with God, and with others. So remember that today. My name is Robert Dean Steele. This is your daily Bible class. You have yourself a great and godly day.